You are listening to the Small Town Big Talk Show, the weekly podcast for small town people with big dreams and ideas. I'm your host, Rebecca Undum, and each week we'll cover a topic meant to inspire, encourage, and empower you to live big in your small town. Although it has its challenges, nothing beats small town living, and we're committed to sharing the best of what's working in the communities we serve. So enjoy this episode, and we hope it helps you to bloom where you've been planted. My guest on today's episode is Wendy Royston. Wendy is a professional writer, editor, and writing coach with over 20 years experience. And she joins me on the show today to talk about how she came to have the role she has as it is today as a freelance writer. Living in a town, Ethan, South Dakota is where she's from. It's a community of just 330 people, and it doesn't even have its own newspaper. So how did she become a freelancer? How did she become a freelance writer in a town that's so small? Now, it does have good internet. She and I chatted a bit about that, but we live in such a cool world that we have the opportunity, if you have a marketable skill, to become a freelancer in that role. And she shares how she did that. She shares a bit of her backstory. And there's so many cool takeaways for anybody that might want to take on a side hustle like this, and you just never know. It could grow into your full-time gig like it did with Wendy. Enjoy this chat with my good friend, Wendy Royston. Well, welcome, Wendy.
Hi, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show with me today.
Thank you for welcoming me.
Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you. So in your intro, I shared a little bit about the fact that you are a freelance writer, and do you primarily just write for the Daily Yonder, or do you have other places where you do your writing?
I actually have a variety of weekly and daily newspapers in the area, magazines, blogs, a little bit of PR for businesses and organizations, and a little bit of writing coaching too.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't you tell us, you and I were chatting a bit before the episode started, just how you got into journalism, and give us some background on your community too, because I always think it's relevant for people to hear how small of a town you actually live in, because you're doing cool work. I mean, the fact that at the end of this, anybody can go out and read your work is really cool. So how'd you get into it, and how'd you kind of pivot into freelancing as an adult?
All right. I live in outside of Ethan, South Dakota. Our population here, I think it's still 330. So we're definitely rural and tiny, feel like family most of the time. My husband graduated high school here. My in-laws live here. So it's definitely home. I went to elementary school here for a while, but I graduated 10 miles down the road in Parkston, South Dakota, out of 1,400. And that still kind of feels like home because they have a few more amenities and services that we can't get here. So
yep. Right. That makes sense.
So when I was in high school in Parkston, I had a really cool opportunity. When I was a sophomore, I was a part of the Journalism 1 class that had this school newspaper. And so we did a newspaper that was one page printed inside of our weekly town newspaper, the Parkston Advance. And in March of my sophomore year of high school, the editor had to be out of town. And so she was unable to cover the first time that the Parkston High School volleyball team had ever made it to the state tournament. And so she and the publisher got chatting, and she said, what about one of these high school girls or kids? And they called the first person on the pile that they thought could handle it, and she was on the volleyball team. And so I was their second choice. And so I found out then that you can be paid to do some writing when that's not your quote unquote job.
Right.
I believe I was paid $50, and as a sophomore in high school in Parkston, South Dakota, that was huge.
Well, yeah. And for something, that doesn't require you clocking in. I mean, you were paid to do the project. Was that
right.
the first time that happened, or you experienced something like that?
Absolutely. And so
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And it opened my eyes to the possibility of writing as a career. Prior to that, I was a huge reader as a kid. My mom in the summertime would be like, go outside. And I'd say, no, I'm good. My book is so interesting. And so I always loved stories. And so then to be able to be paid to tell a story was just wow, you can be paid to do this thing that comes naturally to me. That's kind of cool. But then the paper would call me off and on to write something here and there for them. So when I went to college, I created this great friendship with newspaper editor and publisher. And actually, I think it was my junior year So it would have been work done like in my sophomore year, I think, that I was taken to the South Dakota Newspaper Association for the first time. And I believe I even received an award that year. I'd have to really think about when my first one happened. So as a junior in high school, I was exposed to these wonderful newspaper people from across the state and started to build these relationships and get to understand the industry from the inside out. And, I went to South Dakota Girls State and was on the Journalism City and got to know people at South Dakota State University in the journalism department really well before I ever even became a student. So when I went to college, the publisher from Parkston encouraged me to go work at the newspaper in Brookings. And so right then and there, I even started doing some freelance work for them. It kind of just ricocheted from there.
Okay, so a couple things that I think are really cool about this is, you and I were talking about one of the things that I don't think everybody gets, like we were talking about the importance of our jobs, both of us, like being work from home people, very, very different jobs that we have, but the ability that we have to do remote work or freelance work, the importance of the internet to being able to do that, right? You and I were chatting about the fact that 20 years ago, these jobs wouldn't exist.
Right.
And so as people are listening to this, what I'm hoping we can kind of explore for people is just all of the opportunity that may exist for people that already live in the community that we're in. So like my community is 1,800. You have you said Parkston's 1,400. It's asking yourself the question from a community standpoint, how many people have latent talents and skills that we aren't leveraging, or do they know how to start, or what to do? Or freelance writing is a really cool thing, and I think a lot of people would see that as like a pipe dream. Do you know what I mean? Like a dream that would never come to fruition, especially if you choose to stay in a small town. So I would love for you two to share a bit about your perspective on the importance of making connections with people outside of your community and how you even foster that still today, because I think that's something that's also really important. We can't innovate from within.
Right.
Like, so if you don't ever leave your community and you don't ever collect or hear other viewpoints, it's pretty hard to change things or to see, things even tweak for the better, right? So what's your perspective on that? What part does that kind of networking outside of Ethan and Parkston and kind of your immediate area there? Because that's how you and I met. We met at a rural conference that Dakota Resources hosted, and I loved you immediately. It was a really fun, just kind of immediate connection. And I think to me, it's always so valuable, the connections that you can make. How does that play into what you do today?
When I was working with Dakota Fire Media, I was the editor of 2 magazines that were published every other month. And so I did a lot of traveling mostly within the region, but also some outside the region, and got to know a lot of people. And I've always been a person who loved learning. My high school graduation speaker actually was another Parkston High School graduate who'd gone into broadcast journalism. And to be honest with you, I was trying to talk myself out of a journalism career at that point. I did marry my high school sweetheart, and he was not going as far as Brookings. And so, at 18 years old, you kind of go, oh, maybe I better stick around. But her speech is what absolutely just sealed the deal on my career. Stood up there and talked about getting a postcard in the mail, and the head of the journalism department, who was still there when I went, saying, you have to decide, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said, I just checked a box, and it was the best thing I ever did, because as a journalist, I get to know a little about a lot. And that really resonated with me. I just instantly was in tears, because I knew that was my calling, to know a little about a lot. I'm not an expert on anything, maybe writing, but I get to go out and, if I go to an economic development conference and learn a little bit about that, nobody would call me an economic development expert by any means, but I do know things about economic development. I know things about drainage, and I've gone to all these different conferences, and sometimes even my children are like, why are you going to the arts and culture? It doesn't really fall into what you're doing. And it's like, I go there to meet people and hear their stories, be inspired. And I always kind of figure if I pick up work or think of a new way to do work in the process, it's a bonus. But for me, it's all about relationships and getting to know people and the things that are happening in the world. One of my favorite tasks when I was with Dakota Fire was to do the community feature. I would go into one of the rural communities, and they were almost always just teeny tiny little towns that sometimes I hadn't even heard of. And every time, I always said my mission was to spend 6 or 8 hours getting to know the people, places, and things that made the place tick. And then tell that story in pictures and words. And every time on my way home, I'd call my husband and say, we're moving,
Oh,
and
that's funny.
we both knew that would never happen. And he's like, we can't, because in 2 months we'll have to pick up again because you'll have a new story. The people that I meet along the way, I just always carry them. But those conferences are a great opportunity to learn and be inspired from like-minded people, even if it's not the same exact work. Like you said, we don't do the same thing, but we have the same thought about our small towns and wanting to see them succeed and our families and wanting to be able to grow them and see them thrive here and the value of where we live. And so to go there and learn new things and broaden that network is just, it's priceless. It's so valuable.
I don't know if you feel this way, but you said something that I think is really, really applicable. It's pertinent to me as well. And just, there's some, it's not stigma. I don't want to call it stigma, but there might be some misunderstanding or maybe it's generalizing that happens with people that have jobs like ours, where you work from home. Mm-hmm. So one of them is that you don't really work. I think that's maybe one of them. Like they put working in air quotes, like you're not really working. And then the second thing, and I want to hear if that resonates for you, because I think if nothing else, by highlighting the fact that, so you and I do very different work, but we're both doing this kind of remote employment thing. And that, so 20 years ago, these jobs couldn't have even been possible. 20 years from now, I think this is going to be the norm. I think this is going to move in a direction where a lot of people are doing work in the same kind of fashion that we are. So there's first just that general misunderstanding. And then when you talked about traveling, I speak for a living. I travel every time I'm going to speak. I'm basically traveling. But then to also, like you said, choose conferences or go to things for my own edification as a human and as a business owner. A lot of times it's not even just my family. For sure, I always have to clear it with my family, right? Because my husband has to support. We've got little kids and whatever. But a lot of times I get comments from other people. A lot of times it's other moms that'll say things like, oh, I could never travel that much. If I really dwelled on it too much, I would feel bad about that. It would make me feel like I'm not doing well by my children or something because I'm choosing to be gone. Do you wrestle with that? Do you get comments like that? And if so, how do you work through that?
Well, I think in my career right now, I don't travel all that much. October happened to be very heavy for me. 3 days in northern Minnesota and the last 5 Carolinas. I have 5 daughters. And my husband, we kind of approach having 5 daughters. We get a lot of sympathy, if you will, from people who are like, oh, 5 daughters, I feel so bad for you. But that's not how we frame that in our minds and in our family. We believe that our daughters are capable of anything. And I'll be honest with you, my husband believes in me more than I believe in myself.
That's fantastic. Good for you.
I'm very fortunate. And actually, when we made the decision together that I would go into just freelance, if you will, we both had things we were nervous about. Would there be enough work? Where would I find work and all that? We knew we had some possibilities out there. But one night we sat down and we had dinner alone together and he's like, I picture you being the person who, and he told me, like he spoke exactly what was deep in my heart that I was afraid to say. Like
cool.
Things that, like dreams I never thought would be possible. He was speaking them and going, this is what I see for you. Like I couldn't believe that he'd even thought those things. So what I think that we're giving to our kids, I do miss some things. My daughter just ran in the state cross country meet and I felt horrible missing it. Thankfully, we live in a rural community. Our families are close by. My in-laws took them and took my other 4 daughters to watch their sister run. They broadcast it live on Facebook. And so I wasn't there. I couldn't hug her and truly experience it, but yet I could thanks to technology.
Right.
And I asked my daughter, how do you feel about me missing this? She was so gracious and she's so humble. And she's like, no, Mom, it's totally fine. I know that you care and all those things. But what I hope that we're modeling to our daughters is that you can achieve whatever dream that you have right here. If that is your dream to be here, you can still make your dreams come true.
Right. Right. And you can't show them that. You actually can't show them that just by saying it. Like
right.
that is, we all know that, but our kids watch us. They pay attention to the choices that we make. And so if we make a bunch of choices that are contradictory to what we are telling them, like if you don't in any small way chase your own dream, Wendy, as a mom, they're going to be like, well, mom didn't do that. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think I love it so much. The fact that you're raising 5 daughters, like kudos to you. And, we've got 3 kids. We've got a mix. We've got 2 boys and a girl.
Right.
I do think that those sacrifices and those are discussions that get to be made within your family. And I feel the same way. I've had to miss some things. Like I'll miss their Veterans Day program this Wednesday, in fact. And I hate missing things. And again, I want to be really clear as we're talking about this too, that if you are the parent that never misses a thing, please know that that doesn't mean I'm also
right.
I'm not criticizing you. That's a choice that everybody has to make. But I think we are sometimes limiting ourselves for what's possible, especially in small towns, because we think, well, I don't want to be gone or I don't want to do this. And I'm just saying, hey, open up your mind a little bit maybe to what's out there and the people that you can meet. Because like you said, to me, conferences it isn't even just the people I meet. I love people, obviously, but I always end up walking away with something that I can actually use in my own life, whether it's my role as a parent or a wife, but community development, and obviously you're choosing your conferences based on what you're hoping to gain. But every time I go somewhere where we're talking rural, anything, I get ideas about what we could do here in Oaks. And if even a few more of us were doing that on a regular basis, that creates a momentum that's pretty hard to stop, I think.
Right. I agree. There's huge value. I love that these rural conferences are becoming more and more available to people. I think there's huge value in that. And I do hope that soon I'm not the only person from my community sitting there, because it's one thing to bring back ideas, but I think it would be really neat to sit at the table with people from my community and say, let's talk about this dream together. I think there's huge value for the community in that. And the other thing that I wanted to say about traveling is with our 5 daughters, because it's kind of, I've kind of always, in a sense, done the work from home at least part of the time. Even when I was at the newspapers, I was in the office like 3.5 days, and then I would work from home, I think 1.5 days is how I think it went down. But I think it was really important for the girls to see me doing that. And it's also, it's like created, our girls are very busy girls. They have their own goals, and they, one of the things I'm bad at is saying no. And I kind of see that happening with them. Also, they're trying to do all the things, but I think we're showing them that you can do more than one thing at the same time and kind of keep the balls in the air. And I've seen it happen with my girls already. The oldest is 14. And, when I go away, my husband never says, well, that's not fair to us or anything like that. It's just, okay, yep, we're just going to pick up and do your work while you're gone. And they just kind of pull together and it happens. And I don't have to worry because I've shown them, I've given them tools on how to kind of be the mom. Now, not that I don't think I'm needed. I hope I'm still needed here. But
oh, right. But I think, it really just, the other thing you're talking about, the idea of coming with a group of people or even a couple of people from your community. This is why I think this discussion of freelancing and remote work is so important, because oftentimes that kind of work does actually give you the flexibility to go to some of these things. It's harder if you own a business and you're the only person in it. Finding the ability to leave it is not an easy thing.
Right.
So I can appreciate that. And same with even just an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 job where you work for somebody else and you have those expectations. So I always just want to be really careful that it doesn't sound like I'm criticizing like whole subsets of population as we're talking about this. But I just think that there are people that crave this kind of the juggling, the balance of work and life and it all kind of meshing together, and this work from home kind of, it's a lifestyle and it's a choice. It's not glamorous though. I always want to be sure that people get that. Like you had just said, you're going to go and like do laundry because you're in your home and it's there. And so honestly, for me, time management is an enormous part of being able to stay on task and stuff. But I think if we can move our communities in a direction where we're a little more open to this kind of potential for people, then you can find other people that can leave and go to these things with you. Because I agree, it's happened to me so many times where I'm like, God, I wish I was not the only one from Oaks here. Like, how do I take all of this and download it and digest it and share it, so that something actually happens? That can feel very overwhelming sometimes, especially if it's a conference that's just chock full of great ideas, which a lot of times they are.
I absolutely agree. And you're right. We do have a privilege that not everybody has. And not that I want to say that anybody is living a lesser lifestyle than me.
Right. Not at all.
It's definitely not glamorous. But, the beauty of what I do is that I can take my work, probably 90% of my interviews are done on the phone. Sometimes I do go to events and take pictures and record things live outside of a conference or something. But most of it, I can interview, hands-free driving down the road. And then when I get there, I can put that together in a break,
Right.
So that's the beauty of what I do. I remember in college, they talked about, one of the speakers that we had, or one of the professors talked about the future of newspapers. And they talked about eventually we would get our news on our phone. But the comment was made like, the internet will never completely replace a newspaper, because who would ever take their phone to the bathroom? And it's like, I was looking at my phone that kind of looked like a remote control. The evolution of things has been just so crazy, because we have, I've got my laptop and my tape recorder and my digital camera, and everything can just be done on the go. And so I'm very fortunate. And the other part of that is, we talked a little bit about how much I might be gone or miss when I go to a conference. Like, I'm able to be so much more present than some parents can be because of a traditional job,
Right. Totally agree.
When I'm here, I'm here. Even if I'm working, I said I'm really bad at saying no. Sometimes I need to remember to try to structure like an 8-hour day or a 10-hour day or whatever that goal is, because that time management thing, I'll be honest, that's something I'm still figuring out, because I am a night owl by nature. And so I tend to be like, oh, I can work until late, forgetting sometimes I have to get up early tomorrow and help my kids get ready,
Right.
But I am able to structure my day how I want to accommodate for what I need and for what my kids need. So like this morning I got up early and I went to a breakfast event for my girls' running club. And, I might leave early for a cross country meet or a volleyball game or something. And I'm able to do that. And there's a lot of parents who can't go as much as I do. And, I sympathize for them, but then I'm gone sometimes, like for that state meet. And so they probably are wondering, where the heck is she?
Right. And I think that's kind of like, it's that feeling of judgment that can be really hard for people. I think when you're first starting out and you're doing your own thing, whatever that looks like, it's just that we all have to remember that our choices aren't actually going to be right for everybody. And there's going to be people that judge things that we do. That is actually just human nature. And the reason they're doing that is because they themselves couldn't have ever imagined themselves doing it. Right. So they're just operating from a completely different set of standards and values and goals, maybe even for their lives. So rather than getting upset about it, just recognizing like that's what we choose to do as people isn't going to be everyone else's cup of tea, and nor should it be. We need everybody doing what they want to do, and like that, whatever the best stewardship of their God-given talents and skills, like whatever that looks like, we need everybody doing that, right? That to me is like fulfilled, purposeful people doing it their way. That's what I want. I hope that these episodes can encourage people to think like, am I living my own life in the most purposeful way? And sometimes you just do jobs to pay bills, and that's okay too. I mean, it's, but I think your story is so cool, because I really do think there's a lot of people that have that writing as a skill or a talent is kind of a bug. Like you catch it and then it's really hard to let go of it. And I think there's a lot of people that probably feel that way and will be inspired by the fact that you're doing it. You built a career for yourself as a freelance writer even in a very tiny town. It's just super cool.
To me, it also goes back to networking,
Right.
A lot of who I write for are the newspapers that I met in high school and have just fostered relationships over the years, or people that I came into contact with while traveling with Dakota Media. The Daily Yonder was kind of a byproduct of working there. I was sent to the National Rural Assembly one year, and years later ran into the person who organized the Rural Assembly. Whitney Kimball Coe was in South Dakota at Rural X, and saw her at a session or at a reception, and she sought me out and we talked about what I was up to. She found out I was freelancing, and hey, we could really use someone in the Midwest. And so that's where that came from.
That's so cool.
It is. And that's how I got to know Rebecca.
That's right. That's how we got to meet. I know it's always just, it's so encouraging to me. I love it. I love it truly so much, because the other thing that I think, so I kind of was just jotting down, so networking, it's about relationships, obviously, meeting new people. It's about the ideas for sure.
Right.
But the other thing is that it becomes this like a giant resource list. Like you get to know all of these people doing these amazing things, and you never know when you're having a future conversation and you'll say, and that person says to you, I just really wish I knew a freelance writer, right? And I could be like, well, I know one, So I love the fact that it just makes our entire small world much, much bigger when we make those choices, to get outside of the comfort. And it's a little uncomfy sometimes. Like you were just at the Rural Women's Summit, which that came across my world a little too late for me to fit it in. And I kind of had a lot already going on in October. But your experience there was some very different, like a diverse and wide range of viewpoints on things, right?
Yes.
And yet sometimes, and I don't know, you can speak a little bit if you care to, about what that experience was like. Sometimes it just makes you really appreciate where you come from. And that you're surrounded by, and you also, I think, like you're surrounded by people that maybe do share similar kind of foundational beliefs.
Yes. Even in rural America, life is different. And, I went to one session about mass incarceration, and I was just brought to tears at this woman who had defended, different people who were convicted of crimes. She was a defense attorney. And she talked about this man, and I don't think she shared what his crime was, but, from her perspective as an attorney, she didn't feel like it was something that deserved life in prison or something, and he got... Mm-hmm. He got 50 years reduced to 25, and he was a 25-year-old man. And she talked about this. And she mentioned he was such a good-looking young man, and he's 25 years old. He made a bad choice. He's heading into prison for 25 years. He's going to come out of prison at age 50 with the life experience of a 25-year-old. And yet he's going to be aged to at least 70 because of what the prison system will do to him. And I just was moved to tears. I'm like, this is not our everyday to have that concern for our sons and daughters here. Yes, there's crime here, and yes, there are bad things that happen, and I think we're kind of fortunate to live in an area where that's just not our everyday. There were also just people living completely alternative lifestyles, and the things that they shared that they encounter, and the hate and the non-acceptance. There are people living those lifestyles here, and I hope that in South Dakota and North Dakota that we are embracing those people and giving them like the same opportunities as everybody else, and working through those things together. I know that we're kind of viewed as backwards, too conservative in this area sometimes, but I hope that we're helping those people through that part of life and that figuring it out.
Right.
In a way that isn't laden with hate. And yet it was like, gosh, I don't even know how to react to some of this because it's so not part of our world.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what I meant by the idea that sometimes you go and you hear things that, like you said, rural does not look the same all across the country. It really doesn't. And so I think sometimes you go and you listen probably more than you speak, right? Because you just almost feel like I have nothing to contribute to this conversation because it's so far out of the norm of what I deal with day in and day out. And I think it can give you a true appreciation for where you're at. Yes. Because there are a lot of hardships that rural America faces just every single day, even Midwest rural America, farming right now in particular, and like Mother Nature and her wrath right now it's not ideal. But then you go and you listen to that and you just think, okay, well, everyone's going to have something. So we'll take what we've got. And And I just think it's so good. It's perspective, right? Yeah. So it's when I think about what value there is in leaving your community and immersing yourself with other people, it's the relationships you get, it's the ideas you get, and it's perspective, because it can be really hard to not just see challenges. Sometimes it depends on what you're doing and, what you're struggling with. But when you go and you hear something like that, like I don't think about incarceration. I don't think about that for my kids. And maybe shame on me, but this is, again, it's just perspective. It's not knowing better or not knowing different, because it's not something I deal with day in and day out.
Right. We just kind of assume here that our kids are going to graduate high school and then either go to a tech school or career school or get a job, That's what we envision. But for some people that it's more likely that they're going to end up in prison, or they're, and that's not necessarily always because of the family upbringing. It's more just the culture in that place and the people they're exposed to and the events that are happening around them. And sometimes it's not even their fault,
Right. Yeah, it's really hard to even imagine. So I love that you shared that, because I think that's a really clear example of, and yet how it's, how different other people might be living and the things they might be experiencing, and yet what you can learn or take back from it. And sometimes it is just that, like, wow, we have it really good here in rural North Dakota and South Dakota, right? Where sometimes it's hard to always see that, you get immersed in it and you just need that outside shift sometimes, I think.
I agree. I think it's good. Sometimes it feels a little ironic because a lot of these conferences are held in urban settings because they need things that can handle, we're taking the size of my town and having a conference, the Rural Women's Summit was 250 women. And then there were speakers in addition to that. My town is 330. So we took all of Ethan and we plopped it down in a place where we had to provide, food and housing and all of those things. So it had to be in an urban setting. There's people who laugh. They're like, oh, you're going to Greenville for a rural conference? Oh, that makes sense, but it's like, yeah, but there are logistics that can't happen in even Mitchell,
right.
Mitchell it can, but certainly not in Ethan,
Exactly. Well, and I think that's the hardest part about being rural is not even just like accommodations alone is one huge thing, but then traveling to our communities, like, yeah, people are going to have to fly here if it's a nationwide conference. Yeah, those are things I think about these things a lot, Wendy. I don't know, because one day I want to host a decent sized rural women's conference here in Oaks, North Dakota.
I'll be there.
I know you will. Hopefully you'll be like on a panel speaking or something. But it's one of those things that you just immediately you do go, well, how are we going to do this? So anyway, it's cool though. And I think, of course it seems ironic and kind of maybe hypocritical that you're at a rural conference in an urban setting, but until someone shows the way, I guess this is how it is, right?
My mind was opened my last day in South Carolina. I had like 24 hours free. And so I was like, okay, that's when I'm going to go explore. And it happened to when I got ready for the day and I walked out of the hotel, there was a drizzle. Okay, I live in South Dakota and we've had nothing but drizzle and downpour all year. So this is, okay, yep, this is rural, And as I'm walking, it starts to just downpour. And so I take refuge under this bridge and there happened to be a homeless woman sleeping. Of course, I'm a people person and we start talking and she says, what are you doing walking in this? And I said, well, I'm from South Dakota and I just wanted to explore and I was trying to keep my luggage light, so I didn't bring an umbrella. And she looks at me and she says, you have to understand that not every place you visit is like where you're from. You need to come prepared. And I thought, here's this homeless woman who has everything she owns in a bag, but that bag contains an umbrella. Like she's more prepared for the world than I am.
Right.
So I think I'll carry her and her story with me forever too.
That's really cool. I'm actually writing that little quote down. Not every place you visit is like the place where you're from.
Yeah.
And that is mind-opening stuff right there, right? And it just definitely makes you think. It's awesome. So Wendy, I have two final questions for you. And I asked you this earlier. Is there a story or a community, maybe this is even back to your Dakota Fire work where you did this kind of featured community. Is there something that you've covered in the last however many years that stands out in your mind? And then the last question is just, what does living big in a small town look like to Wendy Royston?
So when I went to the National Rural Assembly in 2015, I was young enough at that time to be a part of the Young Leaders Day. And at that table, we were talking about different things rural. And I need to know how you define rural. And it was interesting to go around that table and hear from different people on what rural looked like to them. Because for a lot of them, it was almost like within an urban setting, but it was an area of urban that was just underserved in some way. And for a lot of them, it was access to groceries or it was access to technology. There were a lot of places that didn't have broadband. And actually, when I just was at the Rural Women's Summit last week, they were talking about that again. And so for me, being from the Dakotas, where we had in South Dakota, we had a public utilities commissioner who was so proactive in bringing technology here. We have, we were talking about this earlier, fiber to the home. Mm-hmm. We have fiber optic broadband service at our house. And so maybe you can't afford to purchase that service to your home, but it's available in in a library or a coffee shop. There's access out there. And so I think for some of us, in some places, having these jobs is still impossible. But how would I use that journalism degree or that sociology degree from my house? That won't work. For them, it's still a very limited realm of possibility there. But for us, I think, freelancing, whether it's writing or, what you do with the speaking and just inspiring people, it's totally possible here. And I think that we would, not be using what's been given to us very responsibly if we didn't take advantage of it and use it to the best of our abilities. Right. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. Like, if somebody's got a dream and they want to look for a way to either supplement their income or create their own business or their own dream, it's possible in a lot of these areas, especially in the Midwest, because of the vision that we've had from others ahead of us.
Right. And I thank you for adding that, because I do think, again, the goal of these episodes is always to encourage, uplift, empower, support. But there are people that may listen to this that say, well, good for you. They go, well, good for you too, that you can do this, because they actually don't have that fundamental thing. And internet is a fundamental thing. You can't do what we're doing without it. Right. Because the world has shifted enough. And so I think it does then remind us, as we come back home to the Dakotas and the Midwest, that if that is something that your community has, because like you said, either the state has provided for it or a local telecommunications company has provided for it or made it something that's possible, that it is almost like throwing the gift in the gift giver's face to not take advantage and use it. Like, be good stewards of these gifts and the assets that are there, and see them as the asset that they are, because rural internet is an asset.
Absolutely. Well, the other part of this is we can't ignore the fact that there are other reasons that people can't pursue this as a full-time gig like you and I can. Mm-hmm. One of the major roadblocks that I can think of right off the top of my head is some people they have to be the person who provides the benefits to the family, the health care and those things. Right. And so I'm very fortunate to have a husband whose career takes care of that,
Mm-hmm. And I'll say
know.
that as a family that we are both self-employed. So our insurance is slightly more than our mortgage payment every month. It's a legitimate challenge. There's no question. And yet I always encourage people to really look at what you could potentially save, really look at, because again, you can get coverage. Is it good coverage? No, it's not. It's horribly expensive and our deductible is very, very high. And yet we're doing it because, again, there's a way forward for everybody that has the desire. And that's, I always just want people to know that you may make some other sacrifices in other ways, and that's okay.
I don't have to drive to work. Depending on what you're doing and how you want that to look, you maybe don't need childcare. You're not eating out as much. There's just a lot of things to consider that offset some of those bigger expenses. It is scary, going from somebody else providing a set paycheck to you have to hustle for what you want and then get the work done.
Right. And I also always say to people, like, it doesn't mean you can never go back.
Right.
If you try it and you really just can't seem to find your rhythm with it, I always encourage people to not give up too quickly, but there are ways to make it work, like I feel like we're moving into this interesting world where many more people have like multiple jobs,
right?
Like little part-time things here and there to kind of fill the gaps because they're pursuing their thing. There is nothing wrong with that. And it's non-traditional. It looks different. It's harder for people to understand. Like even your parents, grandparents, they may have a harder time wrapping their brains around what you're doing if you're not like, I work for this one company and this is what I do every single day. But I think it's the world that we're living in because the opportunities are vast compared to what they used to be. So it's kind of cool.
Do I know that I'm going to live the rest of my career as a freelancer? I don't know that. Mm-hmm. There might be some opportunity that comes up along the way that I say, yes, I want to try that,
Yep. And that's part of being open to it, right? Being open to what comes next.
Right. And, actually my career has taken different roads over time. And there have been periods of time where I used my other degree for a while. And, this is just where I've landed at this time and it's working right now. And, I can't see it changing anytime soon, but I don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
So.
Okay, awesome. So back to those two questions. Okay.
So an impactful story recently or over time.
Yeah. Or even back, if you remember a community that you had visited that you were just like, this is so cool what they're doing.
In Armour, South Dakota, when they want to get something done, they do it. When I visited Armour, South Dakota, they have this a movie theater on Main Street. It's the Lorraine Theater. It's an old theater. I would have to look up to see how old it is, but they revived it several years ago with volunteers. And they have people who come in and they sell concessions, they clean, they run the projector and all those things. And I remember going to Armour to do this community feature. And as I was interviewing the mayor, who was a big part of the theater board, I said, it'd be really kind of neat to get a picture of a bunch of the people who volunteer here on Main Street in front of the theater and take a picture. And it was just awesome. Like only in a rural community do you send out a text and say, hey, in 15 minutes, this reporter wants to take a picture. Everybody get on Main Street. I can't remember, but there were like 35 people, I think, in that picture. And that organization means so much to them. And it's such an iconic feature of their community that it was important enough to them right at supper time to just drop their forks and come and take that picture. But it was also really telling of Armour's story, because what I talked a lot about was they have plenty of volunteers for everything. It's just everything just works well, at least from the outside looking in when they give me the front stage view. Things seem to go well in Armour. They don't seem to have what we in rural communities and what they say in rural development is same 10 people syndrome.
Yeah, right.
There were way more than 10 people in Armour moving and shaking and getting things done. That was really inspirational to me to see that happening. And that's really not that far from where I live.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's a very small town.
Yeah, I want to say their population is like 400 or 500. And if I'm totally off base on that, I apologize to Armour. But yeah, it's like everybody in Armour volunteers. And then there was Roscoe, South Dakota, where everybody in Roscoe owns a business. The number of businesses in that tiny town, I think their population was right around 300. I wrote about how there are so many people who drive into Roscoe to work. And that's so unique. And they just had a vibrant downtown and a strong school. They were looking at building a new school at that time. And it's just amazing. There are wonderful things happening in rural communities. And I think we take advantage of what is happening in our own community and don't always see that it's unique, that these things aren't happening elsewhere. The strength of the school here in Ethan that we take our kids to and the family environment. If something happens in that school, I know that I'm going to get a text or an email or a phone call from one of the teachers saying, Sydney had a rough day today. here's what I noticed. I don't know that you get that in an urban school.
Right. Well, that's what I love about it. It really is so important for all of us living in small rural communities to just pay attention and celebrate the things that are happening, because we do take them for granted. And this is human nature. It's all of us. We all do this. I mean, you do it in your family. We just take things for granted until life smacks us in the face and reminds us not to. I mean, oftentimes that happens. I think, again, getting outside of your community can really be one of those things that highlights all the things that should be celebrated on a daily basis where you're from. When you spend a little time with people that are struggling with things that would have never come on your radar whatsoever.
Right.
So, I love that. Okay. Yeah. So final question, Wendy, what does living big in a small town look like to Wendy Royston?
I have this sign that sits right next to my computer monitor that says, life brings us to unexpected places. Love brings us home. I have that there just to help me keep grounded in why I do what I do, and that the travel and going outside the community is important. Like you said, sometimes you have to step outside the community to see what's happening that's good and that's big there. So for me, going to those other places is so important. That perspective. And a lot of times it's not perspective on the world, it's perspective on what's here. And reminding myself that this is the place I want to be. And so living big in a small town to me is making the dreams of myself, my family, and my community come true, and just shining a light out to others so that they can see what we've got here, but also that light also keeps us warm, having everything we need here, but also being a part of the bigger ecosystem.
Right. Oh, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Wendy, for taking time this morning to be on the show. I can't wait to hear people's response to this. The Daily Yonder, is that where you would most recommend that they go if they want to read your amazing writing?
Well, it's kind of a variety. It depends on the day or the week where my writing is appearing. But I do have some work in the Daily Yonder, the Mitchell Daily Republic over here. A lot of what I do isn't actually online because it's smaller newspapers.
Sure. Yep.
But then my work with Dakota Fire is still online too, dakotafire.net.
Okay, perfect. We will get links to all of those various places in the show notes for sure. Thank you so much for all you're doing to make rural great. And I appreciate your time today, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Small Town Big Talk Show. If you enjoyed today's show, we invite you to subscribe on Stitcher, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review. The more reviews we get, the easier it will be for other small town friends to find us. We encourage you to keep on living big in your small town, because the size of your life is not determined by your zip code.